Danaylov here. Nikola, you are in Canada right now?
Toronto, Canada. That's right.
Lovely. You are known as the Larry King of Singularity. How did that happen?
Well, basically, about what is it now? 11 years ago, maybe. Well, 12 years ago, I started a website called SingularitySymposium.com. And about a year later, I started a podcast called Singularity One on One, which eventually got rebranded as Singularity.fm. And, I've done about 260 interviews with singularitarian, transhumanists, specialists in neuroscience, cognitive science, artificial intelligence, robotics, genetics, synthetic biology, 3D printing, nanotechnology, philosophers, artists, critics, religious leaders, all sort of within the realm of how technology changes the very meaning of what it means to be human, and sort of what does the future holds for us, and what things can we do or should we do to sort of steer it towards the best possible outcome for all sentient beings. Anyway, so after I did about 140, 50 of those, I interviewed a professor, I think he's from the University of Kentucky or Tennessee or something like that, Roman Yampolsky, who is an expert on security, the security implications of artificial general intelligence. One of the best in the world, perhaps. And so he named me the Larry King of the Singularity because he said that's how he perceived me. And, it kind of stuck a little bit afterwards. Now, mind you, that was not, and perhaps still is not necessarily always a positive association. And the reason for that are several fold. First of all, back in the day when I started around 2008 or so, when I would tell people that I'm a blogger, they would say, first of all, what is that? What is blogging? And, I would explain what blogging is. And then they would ask, okay, so what's your topic? And I would say, oh, the technological singularity and transhumanism, and they would say, "Oh, are you in the church, in the Church of Scientology or some other such cult?" Because people perceive the technological singularity, from an ignorant point of view, without knowing much about it, and transhumanism, they sound kind of like religious cults, and so then I have to go and explain those things and so on. Now, today, hopefully, the tide is shifting and has shifted a lot. So the technological singularity, thanks mainly to people like Ray Kurzweil, but also people like Elon Musk, even Dr. Stephen Hawking, Steve Wozniak, Bill Gates, has gotten a lot of media coverage. And then transhumanism also has gotten a lot more coverage. Doesn't mean that there are no misperceptions and misconceptions about either of those, but they're getting a lot more popular and a lot more perceived by the public.
Hmm. Yes, but there are still prejudices out there. People think, okay, singularity means something like the computer will become conscious or the internet will become conscious by itself, stuff like that. And how do you respond to that?
Well, so like most things, there is a grain of truth in most beliefs. Now the question is, how big is that grain compared to the rest of it, right? So yes, the idea of the technological singularity is that one day computers may become conscious, and so the question then to me as a philosopher is, so what? What happens then? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And now there's many people who look at this from a very sort of a scientific point of view, and it's a hypothesis. It's not a fact. It's a hypothesis to be tested, and also from a scientific point of view, from the sense that we do have a lot of impact on the context and how, if at all that were to happen, how it would happen, for what reason, towards what purposes, with what kind of designs, and etc., etc. So we have an awful lot of input here, and control over it, at least at the outset. And then there is a minority of people who take it to that kind of religious level, which has given criticism from people such as Jaron Lanier, who called it the Church of Robotics, for example, and others who have called it um, what is it called? The the second coming for nerds, or yeah,
Love that one.
something like that,
Yeah.
right? So and the idea is, again, my point of view is, I look at it from a philosopher and from a scientific point of view, and the machines are still machines. They are likely to be machines for a while still. To be honest, people have been predicting that the technological singularity would be happening around 2022. Because the original paper that Werner Vinge, who was the person who coined the modern meaning of the term the technological singularity, was given in 1992 at NASA. And he said in that paper in 1992 that within 30 years, the human era would have ended. Well, we only have a couple of years left. I don't see the human era ending. And if it were to end, it would end because of us. It would not end because of any other being. It would not be the robots who rise and kill us or take over. It would be us who destroy ourselves and the world around us.
Mm.
So I think that thesis has kind of run its course, to be honest with you. Now, the question is, maybe that thesis has some grains of truth, or maybe even overall correct, but it's just wrong in terms of its timeline.
Mm.
And so we can then discuss, okay, are we 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 500 years away from a technological singularity?
Mm. Thank
Right?
you.
But
Mm.
it is a scientific concept. It is a concept of philosophical implication, and it is a science fiction concept in some of its dimensions. But the point is, it has general implications for our whole civilizations. So it's an idea that sooner or later we have to contend and prepare for in one way or another, because even if machines are not conscious, they already are in charge of so much of our system that they can have power, and they do have power to control us and to maybe even destroy us, not because they're conscious, but because they're malfunctioning, because they're poorly designed, or for a number of other reasons.
Yeah.
And so we need to be able to consider all those implications of the moment that machines basically effectively run our civilizations. This is a very important point that Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, raised in his manifesto back in the day, in the 90s, when he said that machines are effectively in charge of human civilization. Well, today that's more true than it was 30 years ago.
Mm. In light of climate crisis, pandemics, etc., what are your perspectives personally on how mankind can and will survive?
So, so, so the climate crisis is only one of several potential reasons or existential threats as per why humanity may or may not survive. I actually don't think that the climate crisis, as gargantuan as it is an existential threat, because in my opinion, no matter how bad it gets in terms of climate on the planet, chances are in most cases, there will be pockets of humanity left in certain geographical areas on our planet. Now, most of the planet may become uninhabitable. The deserts will become greater. We'll have all kinds of fluctuating storms, bigger storms, heavier rainfall, bigger forest fires, all kinds of issues, bigger droughts, bigger floodings, etc. But there will be still pockets which are inhabitable. The problem is that that would effectually destroy our civilization as it is now, and those pockets of humanity may sort of revert back to a sort of a new feudalist, or even to some degree maybe hunter-gatherer society of thousands of years ago. So, but it's not an existential threat per se. It's just a gargantuan threat because many and perhaps most people may disappear or go extinct, but not all, perhaps. Now, however, humanity could go extinct completely in the case of, let's say, nuclear war. Humanity can go completely extinct in the case that if machines do become conscious and rise up, which I think is a highly unlikely situation, and it's not one of the top 5 things that we should worry about anytime soon, in my opinion, after I've been doing what I've been doing for the past 15 years, 11 years of the work, and then 5 years of that was academic research that I was doing on the topic before that. So it's 15 or 16 years now. So I think with respect to extinction, also another way we can go obsolete is simply by evolution, because let's say we survive. As we know today, everything changes faster and faster than ever before. And that is going to be true more and more, even at biological, not only technological level. And so there may be a kind of a speciation, which is a kind of a negative word and scary word, but the change may become so strong and so big that and so fast that there may be a speciation of our species. People embracing neuroimplants, cognitive enhancement of all kinds, and basically diverging mind uploads. I don't know, you name it. There's many possibilities. I think we're pretty far off from mind uploads right now too, but even minor cognitive enhancements and neuroimplants can lead to divergence in the long run, given enough long run. But that's, on the other hand, not something completely unique or new, to be honest with you, because if you look at it, back in the day, we are Homo sapiens, but we lived for tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, together with 20 or 22, or maybe in some counts, 29 other species of hominids. We had Neanderthals, we had Cro-Magnons, we had Homo heidelbergensis, we have all kinds of other, we had Denisovans, we had all kinds of human species that lived alongside with us. So to be honest, from an evolutionary point of view, it is more the rule that you have a diversity of speciation of hominids than a single one species. And it's kind of strange that only one species, that's to say Homo sapiens, survived. So we may go back to that kind of diversification or speciation of humanity. And then in that case, Homo sapiens per se, as we know it, may not survive, but that doesn't mean that we would not survive or that humanity will not survive. It may only mean that we have evolved to another stage or another level, and now there's like 2 or 3 or 5 different species of descendants of what used to be called Homo sapiens. Yeah. So it depends whether we're talking about a complete extinction of our species with nothing left, or maybe the species would be extinct, but our descendants will prosper and thrive, not only on Earth, but across the universe, in fact, and they would simply diverge in different species, in which case, that's kind of not a bad thing, I think.
Yeah, we already have a broader perspective on neurodiversity when we look at nerds, Asperger, people like that. I call many of them friends, and I've learned a lot from them about how relationships can work on a completely different level, with not so much irritation coming from emotional problems and relationship problems. So yes, that's a lovely perspective. I like it very much. But when you think about today and now, what are, in your opinion, the most important things we should do? And for the audience here, you are also a philosopher. You have studied at Google University or Singularity University?
Singularity University, yeah, but they rarely, if ever, touch on philosophy there. They're basically a startup incubator.
Okay.
So yeah. My background was, okay, so to answer your question, well, let me put the two of them together. So with respect to my background, so my undergraduate degree was in philosophy, political science, and economics, and those were my major interests. But my underlying interest beneath this all has always been ethics. And I just thought that, well, ethics, I started political science because I thought the best place, in theory at least, to apply ethics would be in politics. Then, of course, you can't do politics unless you have some at least basic foundational understanding of economics. And so that was my undergraduate degree on. Then I did my master's degree in political science, and my focus was in drones. And that's kind of like, especially drone warfare, because when I was doing my research in 2004, 2005 in Iraq and Afghanistan, we were just seeing the very first steps of drone warfare. So I thought that's an interesting topic to do research on. And that's how I actually got introduced to Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near. And it happened so that I, by random chance, read Ray's book, The Singularity is Near, and then I read Charlie Stross's science fiction book called, well, his original short story was called Lobsters, but his original book then it was called Accelerando. And it's the same idea, but it's the science fiction version of Ray Kurzweil's book. And these two books put together side by side basically blew my mind. And I was like, I can't believe everything is going to change. It's so amazing. It's unbelievable. So this kind of changed the direction of my whole life and led me to be where I was here, where I'm here with you today. Because after my graduation, I graduated in 2008 at the peak of the recession, couldn't get any job anywhere, even though I sent like 300 or 400 resumes. And I had all kinds of scholarships and academic awards. It didn't mean anything, but because I couldn't find a job, I actually started blogging and podcasting. And I thought, oh, here we go, one step at a time. I'll try to do it on my own. And so now I'm basically a keynote speaker on these topics. And I have what is the first podcast in the world on the topic of the technological singularity and transhumanism, specifically focused on that. And one of the biggest independent blogs on the topic, singularityweblog.com. And so this is kind of my sort of origin story and how we got to where we are today. Now, to answer your question, what are the most important things right now? I think the most important thing right now, and it's a mistake that my community, in particular of singularitarians and transhumanists, but also the greater tech community and even scientists in general, it's a mistake that's very often made, and that's the techno-solutionism. I think the most important thing right now is that there is not going to be a technological fix to our problems necessarily. In other words, technology always helps. It's very important. It's necessary. We cannot survive our civilization without technology, but it's not sufficient. It's necessary. It's not sufficient. So in other words, take climate change, because we've mentioned that. We have a lot of the technology necessary today to move beyond and start making a difference today with respect to climate change. But the biggest impediments to us doing that are not technological, they're ideological, they're philosophical. In some cases, they may be even religious, but let's call them largely ideological and political, of course, right? And so we can have all the technology in the world, or most of it anyway, and yet if we fail to reconcile our political and ideological differences, if we fail to sort of come to agree upon some kind of a foundational ethics which kind of frames all the problems that we face with respect to climate change, we're not going to be able to make a dent or diminish the impact of climate change. And the result of that, the price we're going to pay for that would be severe.
Yeah.
But so the key is, don't wait for a technological fix. If there's a technology we can use it, that's great. But understand that the technological fix is like the final step. The first steps, the foundational steps, are always ideological, political, and philosophical. And if you fail the philosophy, the politics, and the ethics, you can have the best technology in the world, you'll still not make a difference. But if you have bad or poor technology, but you get the other things right, you would make bigger difference. You
So
would
we are
make more of a
talking.
change.
So we are talking about managing higher complexity, managing fear. Yeah, because ideology is a program, an evolutionary older program to deal with fear and to help people to orient themselves in a complex society.
Ideology is basically a security escape.
Yes.
It's a story. It's a story that makes people feel secure, feel safe, feel that they understand what's happening. But unfortunately, the universe has a sense of humor, and it's not designed for logic. It's not designed for storytelling. It simply is. So at best, our stories can capture some kind of a limited phenomenon or a narrow snapshot of an occasion, but never really capture the whole thing, because the whole thing is fluid and it's always in change. You know, it's never static. So an ideology could at best be a story that provides you orientation in a point in time, you know, in a single point of the time-space continuum. But the problem is that even if it's useful for that particular moment of time and that particular space, you have to let it go, because the next one, this could be actually detrimental, if not suicidal. So you have to evolve the story, and that's the crisis that we're witnessing today. You see, the 20th century was the clash of three major stories: fascism, capitalism, and communism. By the end of the 20th century, capitalism was the only surviving story, and ideologues like Francis Fukuyama went on to proclaim that that was the end of history, because capitalism was not only the best story we have ever told, but it is the best story that we can ever tell. That nothing ever could be improved about capitalism. That this is it. We've got it now, and it's the end of history. You see, of course, that's a preposterous kind of a thesis. Even Francis Fukuyama, it took the poor man 20 years to kind of publicly recognize how wrong he was on that, as many other things that he was very wrong on. But finally, he publicly admitted that that thesis was a wrong thesis. And the events of the first 2 decades of the 21st century are clear evidence that the story of capitalism is failing all around the globe. It doesn't work anymore. So we need a new story, a new ideology, a new narrative that can lead us, that could sort of put in perspective all the problems that we're facing today, and that would orient us and hopefully synchronize our attempts to resolve those problems in a progressive and productive way, rather than in a selfish, suboptimal way. Because what we may be facing today is, or one of the problems of capitalism, is that especially nationalistic capitalism, like the kind that we've seen coming out of places like Brazil, the United States with Let's Make America Great Again, places like Poland, Hungary, the Philippines, even India and China even, of course. The problem with those is that we are kind of trapped in a suboptimal game theoretic equilibrium where everyone is worse off at the end of the day, right? And so we need a new narrative which takes us to the optimum equilibrium, where not only we survive and thrive, but the planet and all sentient beings are kind of at their optimum. And that's very hard to accomplish, but what we can see for sure, for a fact right now, is that the current ideology and narrative and story that we have in the world doesn't work. And so there's this vacuum that we need to fill in with something new, something fresh that can do that. Because stories tell us not only who we are, they tell us not only where we're coming from, they tell us where we're going, why we should go there. They tell us what's right and what's wrong, what we should and what we shouldn't do. and everything like that. And if you look at it from the historical point of view, each epoch has a dominant story. And every time when you have a quote revolution, what you have is the transition of an old story to a new story, right? So we had the French Revolution, we had, the story of the divine right of the king. And then basically in a very short period of time, a decade, and maybe even overnight, we had the story of equality, brotherhood, etc., etc. The French Revolution, égalité, fraternité. What was the third one? I'm losing it.
I
Uh,
don't know.
Égalité,
I,
fraternité, brotherhood. The third is, but so
Fraternité is brotherhood.
yeah, equality.
In German, it's Freiheit, Gleichheit, Brüderlichkeit. So we have Fraternité for brotherhood, Egalité for Gleichheit, and freedom.
Yes,
The
and
third is
so
freedom.
and so basically that story changed overnight, and then we had a revolution, and off with the
And
king's head.
Napoleon.
Right. Sure, yeah, and
Yeah.
revolution, as one of the French revolutionaries said, revolution is a bloodthirsty monster that once you let loose, it's very hard to put back. And most of them ended up guillotinized themselves, right? But the point is that you need that change of narrative to have the actual events, and without the change in narratives, the events don't happen, right? And so today, and the same happens when you move from feudalism to capitalism, the industrial revolution, all of those things. Even before that, from let's say the agrarian societies or to feudalism, etc. And now today we're in the 21st century, and so we have to move beyond capitalism now, it seems. We need to find a new story, and because we're having a revolution, but right now it's a directionless. It's a technological revolution which is kind of maybe even in some ways self-defeating, because it's undermining uh, all of our previous structures without having a clear direction or suggestion as per what we should be building.
Yeah.
So if you're only undermining and you're not building, you're ultimately going to get in deep trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I have the third word. It's liberté.
Yes.
Yeah.
Égalité, équalité, liberté.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
Okay. When you look at modern politics and modern economy, are we on the right track?
No, because look at it this way. Oscar Wilde said that we live in a society where we know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So this is capitalism. You have a price for a forest. Oak tree or lumber costs this much and gives you this much profit, and you can make so much furniture or whatever you're making out of it. But that fails to take into account the actual value that forest brings, into the world. How much carbon it sequesters, how much, it holds the soil together so you don't have landslides, how much it provides, refuge to all kinds of animals, plants, insects, all the other, life forms that survive and thrive in a forest. And those are all kind of not valued, right? And so you have this total uh, disequilibrium between what's valuable and what's the price of things. And that's a direct result of capitalism, right? That's, you can't put a price to a clean ocean, to a clean water body, to clean air when you're breathing. I mean, we know those things are priceless because you lose access to clean air, you're dead. You lose access to clean fresh water, you're dead. And so, but those things are super 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 cheap, or they have been, and they have been not valued properly so far. And that's why, for example, of course, GDP is a horrible way to measure progress. GDP is a horrible way to measure progress. It captures a snapshot of a very limited kind of a fraction of the world, and it puts focus and value on the wrong things in some ways, and everything else disappears. And then that little minuscule part of the whole may be growing, but you may be destroying the whole rest of it, and has been happening. And then one day, by the time you wake up, it may be too late, and we may be even approaching that point of the precipice, right? So no, the economic system is totally messed up, and that again goes back to that narrative, the capitalist narrative, because people like Francis Fukuyama and other apologists have done, I don't know, I don't want to say everlasting, but long lasting damage, because in their minds, in their brains, they're so messed up that they think that this is it. You cannot ever come up with anything better. Well, if that's true, and if we can't come up with anything better, we're screwed. We're going to go extinct, and perhaps maybe we should. From an ethical point of view, because humanity today kills 73 billion animals and something like 1.2 or 1.3 trillion aquatic organisms every year. And that's not even taking into consideration the plants, right? I'm just talking about animals, whether aquatic or land-based. And so people who think that we can't come up with anything better, if they're right, then really that's the end of us. Then there's no hope for us. But I don't believe they're right. I think they're not right. And the fact that people are resisting and becoming more activist, and the failure of our systems and our institutions for the last 2 or 3 years, the gradual sort of failure, is a sign that capitalism is simply a point of evolution. It's not the pinnacle of evolution. It's not the final, last, and everlasting word. And that's kind of what's more likely, actually, as I said earlier, in the universe, that everything is fluid, everything is constantly changing. If you have something that's not changing, that's dead, basically, because the moment you stop change, you're dead. And you have to constantly evolve and adapt. And so capitalism must do the same. I'm not saying we will never have capitalism or capitalism like elements of our future narrative and future stories. There's many beneficial things to capitalism. And capitalism played its role in our evolutionary development. But like any other systems, whether it was, the agrarian revolution, the hunter-gatherer society, or feudalism, they played their role in history, and then they were over. And then we moved on. And so now is the time when we have to move on too.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was highly informative. Thank you for your time. Stay with me for a little after talk. Is there anything you want to add in the end for the audience to take with?
Well, I have this metaphor of the magnifying mirror. So if you guys could take one thing away from me, that's the thing I'd like you to take. You see, technology, in my opinion, is a magnifying mirror. And what I mean by that is this, that first, technology doesn't have an essence of its own. It merely takes and reflects our own essence. It reflects the sort of the dreams and the desires of the engineers, the designers, the programmers, the inventors, the scientists, and the creators who designed it. That's what technology does. But it's got this magnifying effect. So it's enormously powerful leverage. And so what we need to understand is that because of its nature of being a mirror, that's to say, again, it doesn't have an essence of its own, but simply reflects our own lessons, we can do one of two things. And so far, we've been doing the first thing. And that thing is, we've been trying to polish the mirror. We've been trying to say, look, we need better technology, we need better science, so let's keep polishing that mirror and let's get the best possible mirror that we can get and forget everything else. And let's do STEM, STEM, STEM. Okay, fine. Having a good mirror is good. Having a mirror that works is good. But in the end of the day, it is us who is projecting the image in the mirror. And therefore, it's reasonable to me, it's logical to me that we should focus even more so than the mirror on the image that we ourselves are projecting in technology, on what we are actually emitting from ourselves, what is being reflected, and to understand that this is where we can make the biggest difference today, the biggest difference today. And so that's where we need to focus. So we should not focus on polishing the mirror, but we should focus on polishing ourselves. And that's where ethics comes to play a crucial role, because if we screw up the ethics, if we screw up the image that we are projecting, you can have the best possible mirror. If you're a monster, you're going to have only a monster reflected back at you. And so, but if we actually work on improving ourselves, even if the mirror is imperfect, we're going to have a better reflection. That's where we need to focus. And artificial intelligence, by the way, closing the loop with the idea of the technological singularity, is a good example of that. Take the Tay AI chatbot that Microsoft designed. They designed a chatbot to imitate humans. Perfect example of the mirror metaphor that I just used. And in a very short period of time, Tay became a xenophobic, racist, sexist chatbot. Why? Because Tay simply reflected our own xenophobia, racism, misogyny, and sexism. And so you can say, well, we need to design a better chatbot. Sure, that makes sense. But also, we need to be better on what the chatbot gets to reflect. Yeah. We need to remove our or diminish our racism, sexism, misogyny, and sexism, so that when the robots, the AIs, who are going to be our mind children, as Hans Moravec said, just like our children watch and look at what we do all of the time, the robots and the AIs would do the same, only even more so. And so just like we have to be good role models for our children and for the next generation with our personal and professional conduct, that's even more true for the AIs. Mm-hmm. And that is, I believe, where we can make the biggest difference, not only for us, but especially for the future. Doesn't matter whether for our future children or for our future mind children.
Thank you. That is lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, guys, this was it. I hope you had fun, and thank you very much. Okay, bye, and we talk further a little bit.